Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Get ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
BJ Show for May 29th. It is a Thursday. So happy it's Thursday. John's never heard that before. John, you've led a sheltered life. That's all I can tell.
I did. Before you taught that to me last month, I had never heard that before, and then I slowly spelled out the acronym. Brad, it would be like a guy writing a book called Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling.
Who would that be?
That would be my friend, Mike Otten. You might know him as Info Dude, and he and I were a staple of Westplex.social. Yeah, great point, Brad.
By the way, speaking of Mike Otten, Mr. Info Dude, I've given him a task this morning. Yesterday, like I don't have anything else to do in my life, I don't know if I explained this or not. We had an antenna that I bought from a company twice. It's burnt up, and I replaced it last night. So we have a new antenna. And believe it or not, for me driving around last night, I would say maybe increased our coverage area by maybe another 10 to 20%. So I'm working on it.
Way to go. What I love about Mike Otten is, Brad, for a man that can stay in your life for that long, think of the patience that Mike Otten has.
And I fired him once, too, which is...
Did you really?
Yes.
Now, in real life or just messing around?
No, he worked for me. He was doing the morning show, and we had to let him go. It's a long story. I mean, he's a good guy. He really is a good guy. But, one of those things, and, you got to make some changes sometimes. And quite honestly, I made a huge mistake by getting rid of him. I should have gotten rid of somebody else. But that's a whole nother story. But, sometimes you look back in your life and you go like, what was I thinking? You know what I'm saying?
It's 2020. But okay. I'm nearly going blind from staring at her photograph and wishing she was mine. Anyway, Brad, I got us off track for once. And my apologies.
Okay. What we didn't talk about was Mr. and Mrs. Macron yesterday. Maybe we'll talk about that today.
Yeah, I saw that over the weekend. That was quite a pie-face slap, wasn't it?
Crazy video. Okay, if you don't know what we're talking about, we'll talk about that later. That's John Combest. Every single day of his life, he puts together this incredible website with all this important information from all over the state of Missouri. Yes, you can go to John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John spelled common, J-O-H-N, and it's .com, johncombest.com, and he's got dozens of stories up there. But what we do is every morning we bring in this guy.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what do you do, sir?
We're on our way to the number one.
We count them down and we start off with...
In third place.
A story from the Washington Missourian, a reporter named Christopher Parker. Brad, this time of year, we've already seen the big picture summaries of Missouri's legislative session. Kind of the big what passed, what failed, what's coming next session. What were some of the personality conflicts? The good thing about the week or two after session ends is that local newspapers will usually have a more detailed Q&A with their own state representative or two to really dig down into what this one man or one woman thought. And that's what we got from the Washington Missourian's Chris Parker. He sat down with John Simmons, state representative from Washington, to go through some of the major highlights. Now, Brad, most of this is stuff that we've talked about before, that big utility bill that passed the Missouri House, the Missouri Senate, signed by Governor Kehoe. But then also, Representative Simmons talks about a few more timely pieces of legislation. I'll start with, let's just go straight into the stadium, Brad. John Simmons describes the KC Stadiums bill, for the Royals and the Chiefs, as a boondoggle. He says, to have taxpayer money supporting this kind of boondoggle for these owners, as a conservative, a fiscal conservative, I'm just against that. I voted against that initially in the House and will do it again in the special session. So what I think is educational about this, maybe unique about this, is that even though we know that the governor and some of his legislative allies are kind of loading up this special session with what you could describe as incentives or goodies or things for folks back home in their district, there seem to be a number of senators and reps who say, look, load this stadium bill up with everything you want, all these other capital spending projects, and I'm still not going to vote to give the Royals a new stadium or give the Chiefs a little bit of help in rebuilding their stadium.
Interesting. He's a chiropractor. Do you know that?
I did know that. Yeah, and he left the legislature. Well, actually, hold on. I did not know that Simmons was a chiropractor. I did not know that, Brad.
Pretty sure he's the same guy who was the chiropractor as elected. Matter of fact, his office right there on East 5th Street. But anyway, I'm glad to hear he's got some sense in him because, once again, I'm the guy that's saying this stupid Royals, and John, there's a dead horse in the studio. Let me get
and talk. I bet it has to do with you pedestalizing women and making a statement about if women were legislators. Is that it, Brad?
No, I'm just saying.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm just saying I'm the only guy I've ever heard, except last week Mark Cox mentioned it briefly. I'm saying bring the Royals here to St. Louis. Bring the Chiefs to St. Louis. We stay in Missouri. We have a stadium that, I talk about this all the time. When you look at Kansas City Chiefs Stadium, the Arrowhead Stadium, it's used essentially 10 days out of the year.
Yeah, you're right, Brad, because there's only so many football games a year, right, Brad?
And it's a single-use stadium. You really can't use it for anything other than football. I mean, it's not like the old days. See, that's the crazy thing. We tore down Busch Stadium number 2, which was a multi-purpose stadium. Remember, they not only did Cardinals baseball, they did Cardinals football back in the day when we had the NFL team. They had the St. Louis Stars soccer. They had those.
Yeah, also had music concerts there too, Brad.
I don't know if you remember, they had those stands that you could move. You know what I'm talking about?
I do know that. Yeah. When the Gridbirds played, you could change the configuration of the stadium.
Right. Okay, now we have a single-use Busch Stadium number 3, which is throwback, and I say it's a cookie-cutter stadium because it's just like all the other stupid throwback stadiums. And it's 20 years old, and we need some help. It's in bad shape. We need help. You know who needs help?
I'm so good. Let me interrupt, Brad. I'm so glad that you brought up the decrepit state of some stadiums because that's story number 2 today.
Oh, well, let's move right on.
Up a notch to number 2.
Headline from Kelsey Landis of the Post-Dispatch today. St. Louis's downtown dome needs a lot more cash, state audit finds. Yes, State Auditor Scott Fitzpatrick looked at a little bit of stadium funding. Brad, there's an official group that is in charge of managing the dome. It's called the St. Louis Regional Convention and Sports Complex Authority. Now, Brad, I think you know more about these topics than I do, so I want you to proverbially keep me honest here. But in short, this piece from Kelsey Landis points out that for a period of time, all these government agencies, all these government groups were sending money to the dome, to this group, to manage the Edward Jones Dome, right? To make sure that it was maintained, to make sure that they kept the lights on, to make sure that the turf wasn't being slowly degraded over time. But over a period of time, these sources of revenue have been shut off. And for example, St. Louis County says, hey, we're not going to send any more money to the dome for now unless we know where it's going to go and why we're sending money to the dome. So the state audit says that there's approximately, I'm looking at the exact number, $155 million in repairs over the next decade if it's to maintain its status as a viable place to play. You point out, Brad, accurately, that the St. Louis Battlehawks still do a sports competition down there. Now, from what I've heard, I haven't been to the dome since the Rams left, but from what I heard, you can tell in the restrooms and some other places that the building is largely untouched and that there's not a lot of maintenance that's been done. And it's just sitting down there, slowly getting older and slowly getting more beat down. So I guess what this tells us, Brad, is that until the group that manages this has a clear plan about how they're going to either maintain the building or get a big infusion of money, I think the dome is pretty much screwed. Here's their quote from the gentleman who runs it. Dome Authority Board member Chris Saraceno says, if we don't at least get into the room, and by that he means talking to government agency leaders, if we don't at least get into the room and start at least having some discussions on how we can move this thing forward, then that building is in big trouble. Brad, just skimming Kelsey's story, I don't think it looks good for the Dome. I think that place is just going to rot, and nobody's going to come in and swoop in and save it with their taxpayer money.
The Chiefs should move in there. I'm telling you, that's what's. Think about it for a minute. You had a championship team. They didn't win the World Series the Super Bowl this past year. But think about the impact that would have in downtown St. Louis. Think about everybody in the stands doing the tomahawk chop. You know what I mean? Think about.
Oh, yeah, they would like that. And St. Louis Public Radio could have a conniption fit.
Right.
By people mocking Native Americans.
Right. Think about that guy in the wolf suit who's, bringing on the crowd. Oh, hold it. That's right. He's in jail.
Yeah, Chiefsaholic, Brad. Brad, he's got a little problem. He's addicted to the Chiefs. He's a Chiefsaholic.
Right.
And he's addicted to robbing banks.
He's addicted to robbing banks. Okay. John, matter of fact, Mr. Info Dude, Mike just texted me. He says, why not move all the teams to Columbia, right in the center of the state, make them accessible to everyone? We do that with state capitals. That's why they moved the state capital from St. Charles to Jefferson City.
From beautiful St. Charles to Jefferson City.
Right. That's why I say we should move the United States capital, Washington, D.C., we should move it to essentially See, that's what we should do. That's what the Kansas people should be fighting for. The United States capital, because that way it would be accessible to everyone. Think about those poor legislators who are from Hawaii and Alaska. They got to fly halfway around the world to go to D.C., where they'd only have to fly a quarter of the way around the world, and everybody would be close. Matter of fact, we could. It would be like a 6-hour drive to the state capitol if it was someplace in the middle of Kansas.
It could be, but Brad, as I mentioned before, I don't want D.C. people. I don't want capital types infesting the Midwest. I want to have them segregated in one area. Keep all the D.C. swamp creatures on the East Coast. We don't want them here, Brad.
Maybe we should.
Hey, as you like to say, Brad, not in my backyard, right?
There you
We're
go.
citizens against virtually everything.
NIMBYs, caves. Okay, number one.
The number one.
It's been anticipated for a while, from FEMA to SEMA, and now the National Guard. National Guard troops will begin their cleanup in St. Louis from those devastating storms. They'll begin their work today. Mayor Kara Spencer made the announcement yesterday. The number is they'll be here for about 2 weeks, and they'll have up to 41 National Guard members will be arriving. They're going to clear large debris, make sure that, utilities are okay, make sure that people can start to get electricity back for folks who have lost electricity, make sure roads are navigable, and get some of that debris off the streets and off the sidewalks in St. Louis City. So National Guard starting their deal today in St. Louis, Brad.
Did you see you read the Post? Did you see the map in there where they had the essentially the storm path? Did you see that?
No, I haven't seen one since the storms. No.
Well, it's sort of sad. And yesterday I was listening in the afternoon to Mark Reardon and my old employee, Sue Thomas, who's just the nicest woman in the world. She lives in a city, and she's a super athletic. She's a runner. She's a biker. She's the whole bit. And she talks about she takes a walk through Forest Park, and she hasn't in a while. And she walked down Skinker, and she walked down Lindell. It's just really sad. The golf course has been especially hard hit. A lot of old trees there. And this is going to be something that's I'm not the biggest tree fan in the world, but it's going to be decades before it gets back to the way it used to be. And some of the areas, the trees are just gone. Either that or they're just totally mutilated and they're going to have to come down, which is very sad, But the interesting thing she brought out was, and this is something which I think was sort of fascinating, she said as she's taking her walk around and through Forest Park, she has views of things that she'd never saw before. And this is
That's one way to look at it, right?
Well, this is something interesting for me. Okay, I drive back and forth on 364 a lot. Okay, the spot where it goes down in the valley, where you're down there essentially from Creve Court Park all the way to the Missouri River. The airport, which is on the north side of 364. Okay, used to be able to see the airport real well. Used to be able to see the planes taking off the whole bit. There's a bunch of trees that grew up along both sides of 364 that cover up the airport. Okay, go out to Chesterfield Mall, drive along Chesterfield Airport Road. One of the things that's very important to a business is the V word. You know what the V word is, John?
Is it visibility?
Yes, exactly. Okay. You got all these trees that they planted there growing up. And my complaint is, you landscape architects, do not plant a bunch of junk at the end of aisles in shopping centers so you can't look out around the end of the aisle to see if you're going to pull out in front of somebody. Get what I'm saying, John? But
yeah, hey, listen, for a guy that's relied on the pullout method, just kidding, I never have. Brad, don't you think that maybe since Bayer is consistently being sued about Roundup and crop protection products, maybe Bayer could just go back to the drawing board and create trees that only grow to maybe 12 feet tall, maybe 10 feet tall. So that way you could have a little greenery, but they'd be more like a bush. Like, wouldn't you support short trees? Like, so you could still be able to see from 364, the airport, but the trees might only be 12 feet tall. So you'd have, to quote Sammy Hagar, you'd have the best of both worlds.
John, we had that, and now it's been declared a nuisance in the state of Missouri. And you know what that tree was?
Was it called honeysuckle?
No, the Bradford pear.
Oh, I hate the Bradford pear.
The Bradford pear
They're
were
almost as bad as the sweet gum trees.
Well, the Bradford pear were, I think, somehow genetically engineered or something like that, and they did not grow that tall, but they grew a main trunk, and then they grew all the different limbs. And when a big wind would come along, up 2 or 3 limbs get ripped off. So we had that. As a matter of fact, you know what? That's interesting. I wonder if that was genetically engineered. You know,
it wouldn't be genetically engineered. It might have been bred. So it might have been, you might have had plant breeders breed it that way. Genetically engineered means that you would take a foreign substance, like foreign DNA, and actually inject it into the seed to make a tree. So what you're talking about is it would be bred that way.
So in other words, that's what they did with like the Roundup Ready seeds. They injected DNA into them?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You would take something that wasn't native to that seed or that plant, and you would put it in there. Yep, you're exactly right.
Interesting.
And Brad, you teased us with this the other day. You didn't give us an update on your concoction for weed killing.
You know, it's interesting. We'll talk about that next break, okay? We'll talk about that.
I'd love that. I want to hear that.
I've been spraying brine, and that seems to be working not super well. But, you know, I'm quite honestly, John, I mean, I've gotten tired of spending all my money on, you know, I bought Roundup. What's the other one I bought? The other one, the Ortho.
You said you bought Ground Clear?
Ground Clear. That stuff, you know, I'm telling you.
And you said you didn't read the label, right?
I did read the label. I read
because you said you didn't know that Ground Clear is almost exclusively the same thing as Roundup.
Well, it's not almost exclusively.
It is. I read the label on the air. It is.
It has something else in there which essentially is supposed to... And by the way, you criticized me on this, and I did some reading on this. There is something called sterilization of the ground. I said the ground is sterile, and you said no.
Yeah, and I said there's not. So how do you sterilize the ground?
It's with chemicals. No,
Brett, it's called a residual herbicide. And the herbicide has residual action, which means it keeps things from growing for a predetermined period of time. That doesn't mean that 5 years from now, nothing will grow there. It means that you have weeks or months of preventative weed control. So I made that clear when we discussed it.
John,
there's no such thing as sterilizing the ground.
I read this in an article talked about
sterilizing. I bet you did. Was it on Boomer Facebook, Brad? Was it telling you to mix vinegar with Dawn and suddenly you'll kill all your weeds? How did that work for you?
What it was on my Boomer Facebook page, it was telling me I needed to go play pickleball, and when I came back, my weeds
That's
would
true, and then go to Harpo's, Brad.
My weeds would
I
all
can't
be
find
dead.
Harpo's, though, because the planters, they didn't think about visibility. So now when people tell me to meet them at Harpo's, I don't even know because there's trees growing up.
See, you're making fun of that, but that is a problem. See, you know, what I could do, and like, for example, hold on a minute, I got a cough. The billboards along the interstates that, you know, the trees grew up in front of the billboards. I think I could have a great business that the mafia would get into. You know what I'm telling you? And the mafia.
Yeah, you mean by cutting down those trees? That's how I feel, Brad. I know that there are so many, you invest so much money in promoting this radio station that sometimes when I drive down the highway, I don't see our billboards because they're blocked by trees.
Well, see, I could call up the, you know, like I could say, hey, meet me in the parking lot at Schnucks. And I meet with the guy who's the head guy from DDI Media or the head guy from Out Front or from Bell. And I go, okay, You got a problem on I-70. There's a couple trees blocking your one billboard. Stroke my palm with little cash and those trees will be gone.
Yeah, I like that, Brad. Because good old Brad might go out there with some white vinegar and Dawn and kill those trees. Or maybe he could sterilize the ground and nothing will ever grow there.
I do. I took the dirt out. I put it in a pot. I brought it up to boiling temperature, and then I put it back out there.
And then it was clean as could be. You could even drink the water.
Right. It was great. Okay, we have to take a break.